Okay, so now we can formally begin. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Preservation New Jersey's virtual series, Talks with Our 10 Most. Again, remember we are recording, so you may want to keep your camera off, stay on mute, all of those things. Forgive me while I start, as I always do, with just a little bit of housekeeping here. I am Melissa Ziobro. I am the Director of Public History at Monmouth University and the curator of our Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. But for this event, I am wearing my Preservation New Jersey board member hat. I am tonight's host, but I want to give a quick shout out to the other Preservation New Jersey folks in the audience. I know we've got Kelly Raffel, who is our very hardworking executive director. I think I saw our president, Paul, come in. I'm not sure if Mark, who is the head of our education committee, is here. Nothing would get done without our office coordinator, Dale. So for everyone who's a part of Preservation New Jersey, thanks for all you do. This is really a team effort. If you are not familiar with Preservation New Jersey, just a little bit about the organization. It was founded in 1978, and it is a statewide member-supported nonprofit historic preservation organization that promotes economic vitality, sustainability, and heritage of New Jersey's diverse communities through advocacy and education. You can learn more about what we do and how to get involved at preservationnj.org. Kelly's been working on a wonderful update to our website. So we hope you enjoy poking around if you've not done so lately, and check back often, because I think it's a bit of a work in progress still. We are perhaps most well known for our 10 most endangered historic places in New Jersey list, which draws attention to remarkable sites and the many challenges that they face. We hope that listing sites annually on the 10 most list can be a catalyst for change and help to find creative solutions for their preservation. We also publish instructional and informative toolkits and other educational materials, maintain an informative newsletter. We've got an active social media presence. So again, we need you to get involved. Many hands make light work. So again, visit our website at preservationnj.org. So on to tonight's program. Preservation New Jersey ventured into virtual programming, as so many organizations did during the pandemic. And we've found it's a nice way to keep in touch with people all throughout the state. So we've kept up with the virtual programming. It's always been free thus far. We record the programs and make them available online afterwards. So continuing to do the virtual programming, even as we offer now post-pandemic, a robust schedule of in-person events as well. So this particular series, Talks with Our 10 Most, is intended to reach back to sites that were previously listed as 10 most endangered sites, see how they're doing, help promote them, see what lessons they've learned that they can share with organizations, and so on and so forth. So tonight we are here with Gilda Rogers of the T. Thomas Fortune House in Red Bank. The house was listed as a Preservation New Jersey 10 Most site in 2007. The mission of the T. Thomas Fortune Foundation is to preserve and further the civil rights and social justice legacy of T. Thomas Fortune through community outreach, education, the arts, and public programming. So Gilda is going to take a few moments, a few minutes, as long as she wants, to tell us about T. Thomas Fortune, the man, and the preservation of the house, which you can see here on the screen, and all of the wonderful work that they are very actively doing in the community. And then we will have time for some Q&A from our guests. So Kelly, is there anything I missed? Anything you want to add before we turn it over to Gilda?
I think you got it. Thank you, Gilda, for being a part of this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much
for having me. I'm grateful and thankful to be here. Yes, I've been living and breathing T. Thomas Fortune for a very, very long time. And I'd always love the opportunity to talk about how this all happened, because it was definitely a community effort. And I try to tell people, I'm a journalist myself. T. Thomas Fortune, too, was a journalist. I went to college. I never heard the name T. Thomas Fortune until I was the managing editor of an African American weekly newspaper in Newark called City News, and we won the T. Thomas Fortune Award. And I did a little bit of research so that I could be prepared to accept the award, and wondered how was it that I never heard of him, never ever knowing that things would reveal themselves as they have, meaning that his home was right there in Red Bank where I lived, and where I lived at that time when I first discovered him as a editor at the newspaper. And then, to kind of just fast forward just a little bit, I used to ride, I live in walking distance to this house. And so I would see the home at this particular state that you're looking at it when it's in its most dilapidated state. And when I would walk by or ride by, I would say, wow, that house, probably was something really grand in its day, and didn't have any idea at all that Fortune had lived there. It just stood out. And then in 2007, it was his name, it was our former councilman, Ed Ziobro, and George Bowden, who is now deceased, but George Bowden was the chairman of the Red Bank Historic Preservation Commission. And one day they approached me and said, Gilda, did you know that a famous African-American journalist used to live in this house, and we're going to have this house put on the 10 most endangered historic sites in New Jersey? And then they told me T. Thomas Fortune's name, and I was, obviously blown away by it all, and I guess felt some kind of connection, because I had learned of him, a few years earlier. And then again, even before they told me about about the house being on the endangered list, I returned back to college to study for my master's degree in history. And I did some research work at the Schomburg in New York. And that's when I discovered that T. Thomas Fortune lived in Red Bank. Now, this is before they approached me with their information. Now I'm saying, wow, he lived in Red Bank. And it all just seemed to come together, that I discovered him years ago as a managing editor. Now I'm, studying for my degree. I've run into his name again. And then a few years later, bam, I'm told he lived there by these historic preservationists. So I tried to form a group. We formed a committee. At the time, I had a bookstore, and we had our first T. Thomas Fortune birthday bash in 2008 for his birthday on October 3rd. And that was our first start of trying to get the word out as to who T. Thomas Fortune was and why it was important to save his house. And that just continued to rev up and his importance. The house, as you see it in its most dilapidated, and now as it has been rehabilitated, was acknowledged and put on the National Historic Landmark Registry because of T. Thomas Fortune's personhood, not because of the home itself, but it was because of him and the contributions that he made and his prominence at that time during what we now, I don't know if any of you are familiar, and I'm sure some of you are, with the series called The Gilded Age. That T. Thomas Fortune is a character in that series because T. Thomas Fortune during that time was someone who was very highly respected by politicians and a myriad of people because of his outspokenness, his fight for justice for African American people, and using his newspaper, the New York Age, as a bully pulpit, so to speak out on these injustices. You know, he was born into slavery in 1856 in Marietta, Florida. And he rose to prominence in a sense when during Reconstruction, his father, Emanuel Fortune, was elected to the Florida Assembly. And his 13-year-old son, T. Thomas Fortune, T, which stands for Timothy, worked as a Senate page at the, building, the courthouse, the, Capitol. He worked there in Jacksonville as a Senate page. And at 13 years old, we all understand that's a very impressionable age. And he got to hear up close and personal the nefarious workings of politicians, white politicians, beliefs about African American people. This became his life's work. And as he grew in life, his intent was to become a lawyer. And in 1877, he went to Howard University to study law. However, he deviated, and after only a year, he left Howard. He started to work for the People's Advocate newspaper that was owned and published by John Cromwell. And from there, he came north even further to New York City, landing in Brooklyn, where he started working in this industry as a newspaper man, as a writer, and established 3 newspapers, the New York Globe, the New York Freeman, and the latter, the New York Age. The New York Age, which has been said to have rivaled to the New York Times. It was one of the most prominent newspapers. Fortune had correspondence in Europe. He had all throughout the United States. He formed the first political organization called the National Afro-American League. Many of the tenets that the NAACP adopted come from the National Afro-American League: education, agitation, and the law. All right. So these are things that Fortune really put forth. That's why he is really a trailblazer, and he's called the bridge to the modern day civil rights movement. In 1884, he wrote a book called Black and White: Land, Labor, and Politics in the South, where in this book, which was reprinted and redistributed recently with a new with a new introduction by Seth Moglen, who's a professor at Lehigh University, and Professor Robin Kelly at, I think, in California. Because the book is very relevant. Fortune was talking about reparations in his work. He was talking about Black and white labor coming together, banding together to really rise up against capitalism. So his paper is widely read. Fortune, I try to tell people, if you want to get a sense of who he was or his attitude, he was what you would say was the Malcolm X of his day. He was very outspoken. He was considered a radical. And he spoke truth to power. He could have been appointed to President McKinley's administration. McKinley had offered him a position in his administration, but when the 1898 race riot, or really coup, took place in Delaware, and McKinley did nothing about it, Fortune, railed against McKinley. He talked openly and, not in politeness. Same thing with Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt has been said, and you can look this up, Tom Fortune, keep your pen off me. So he was known. He was known for, not holding back, saying what a failure Reconstruction had been. When Ida B. Wells, when they burned her newspaper down in Memphis, Tennessee, he had her come to New York and work out of his newspaper. And we all know that, the kind of work that Ida B. Wells produced as the first Black investigative reporter when we talk about her anti-lynching campaign. So that's just, some of, what I would like to share with you about Fortune. And the house, as Melissa has said, in 2007, it was put on 10 most endangered historic sites in New Jersey. And that is when the organization, the T. Thomas Fortune Project Committee that I was leading, got involved with it, trying to see how we might go about trying to save the house. We had absolutely no money, no funds of any kind. And we just started doing little fundraisers to try to raise awareness. Not that we thought we would save the house with those funds, but it was really just to raise awareness and to get people out and interested in why this home was important to be saved. And many people did not know it was a National Historic Landmark. Many people didn't know who Fortune was. They never heard of him, just as I had never heard of him at some point. So it was an education in trying to get people to understand that this piece of real estate in African-American history and culture is only one of 2 National Historic Landmarks in the state of New Jersey that's devoted to African-American history and culture. One of 2. The other one being Hinchliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey. So this was very important that this home be preserved to acknowledge someone like T. Thomas Fortune, who was a journalist, who used the written word, someone who had been born into slavery, who had no education. Basically, when you talk about his ascent to be educated started with the Freedmen's Bureau. And like I said, he had that 1 year at Howard University, but he educated himself. He was very highly educated, and he was politically astute. So the house has come, we continue to, get the word out, to make presentations, And then there was an article that ran in the New York Times in 2015 on Father's Day, on a Sunday, on Father's Day, and it was a big spread, and they were comparing our site with the site in Montclair, the YWCA, which had been restored, and the dichotomy of the two sites was something to behold, because their site was, very beautiful, and ours looked like this top picture. And that is when a developer named Roger Mumford saw and heard about us. And then he did reach out to me, and he had an interest in how he could help in our situation to preserve and to restore this home. And he then took on the task of this. Like I said, this home is not known because of the specificity of the house, but because of T. Thomas Fortune. So the home was in dire straits and ready to basically fall down. It was. The owners who had it in their ownership had applied for a demolition permit. So it was just a matter of time. And it was kind of like beat the clock to get this house preserved, saved, kind of, not by any means necessary, but what would be the best way to be able to go about saving the home and doing the work and continuing the legacy of T. Thomas Fortune, which was all about social justice. So that's how Roger stepped in, and Roger purchased the property. Roger rehabilitated the home, and under the historic guidelines of rehabilitation, it allows you a little more flexibility to rearrange, but not to change. And so the house still retains the historic aura of the past, but things within the house have been replicated. And the work that we now do at the T. Thomas Fortune Cultural Center is centered on the work that Fortune was doing. So it involves writing, it involves using our voices to speak out on social justice and inequalities. We have I have recruited a group of high school students who go by the name of the Fortune Tellers. And they were trained this past summer to be tour guides for our most recent exhibit that opened, which was the Black Press, Stewards of Democracy. And so they're having this opportunity to learn history in a very novel way, and really be able to interact with visitors when they come to the Cultural Center. They represent the Cultural Center as ambassadors. And I'm very proud of this program because I see the students as the sustainability aspect of the T. Thomas Fortune Cultural Center. So I think I've gone on and on. I think I need to have some water. I don't know if there's any questions, and I can continue to answer them.
Well, I think you've given us a wonderful overview to start. I have a couple questions I can ask while the audience kind of gathers their thoughts. For our audience, you will be welcome to either unmute yourself and I'll call on you to ask a question, or you can type your question in the chat and I would be happy to answer it. So, audience, you think about your questions. One thing I want to note is that Peter helpfully notes in the chat that the house was made a National Historic Landmark in 1976. But I think something my students are always, surprised to learn is being a National Historic Landmark doesn't guarantee you any funding streams, doesn't guarantee anyone is going to manage you, doesn't guarantee you will necessarily be safe from demolition, right? So, Gilda, when you encounter the house, I just want to clarify, it was in danger of being demolished, even though it was a National Historic Landmark, right?
Yes, what people don't understand is the home was privately owned. The home was privately owned, so the owners could do with that house whatever they chose, whether it was a National Historic Landmark or not. That title actually, because it was privately owned, was basically meaningless. And it was going to be demolished. Yeah, they had filed for a demolition application through the town at the town in Red Bank to, start to see if they could actually start to tear the house down.
And it was this grassroots campaign, correct, that ultimately halted that.
Exactly. So, like I said, it started in 2008. I opened a bookstore in Red Bank. It was called Frank Talk. That is where we started to gather and form as a committee and to start to try to come up with ideas of where we could go and start talking about T. Thomas Fortune, because that was the task at hand, was to get people to know who Fortune was. And so it all started right there in my little bookstore, and then we branched out to libraries. We did a symposium at Brookdale with Les Payne, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from New York Newsday. He came and supported us because he knew the value of what T. Thomas Fortune contributions to our own society had been. So we were doing various different things to get the word out about Fortune and the situation with the house where he lived from 1901 to approximately 1911. The family was still there because his son graduated from Red Bank High School in 1910.
Now, Gilda, you've mentioned your bookstore a couple times, and you mentioned, that your background is in journalism. I think this is something we see again and again. A lot of times, folks who roll up their sleeves and start these grassroots campaigns to save historic sites do not have a background in historic preservation, right? And that might make it a little daunting. I think there are very caring people in communities who see, historic sites that are threatened and they think, well, oh God, I can't do anything. I'm not formally trained as a preservationist. What would you say to folks who feel like they can't do anything, they can't make a difference?
You just have to have a purpose to a reason to why that it was important to me because of who Fortune was. Once I was first made of his, who he was when I worked as the editor at the newspaper. It was important to me because I was a journalist and I wanted to use my voice to speak out for others, just as Fortune had done. All right. I didn't profess ever to be a diehard historic preservationist. All right. I am, a historian because of the work that I do and what I teach in African American history and studies. So this was a learning process for me. I learned from a number of people about the various different levels of historic preservation. It's, the highest standard, to areas where things can be, massaged a little differently. Right. So these are things I learned. I didn't know anything about historic preservation before getting involved in this project, but I'm much wiser about it now for sure. The home in 1976, because they would look, it was during the bicentennial. It was during the bicentennial, and the Department of Interior was looking for African-American sites to bestow this kind of designation on historic preservation on. And this home was nominated back in 1976, long before I was ever in Red Bank, you know what I mean? So this was done so long ago. It was, and then in 1979, it was actually added to the New Jersey historic sites. But yes, it was a daunting task.
So, if anyone out there is looking for inspiration, Gilda's your woman.
You can't give up. You can't give up. You will be met with opposition. That is for sure. You will be met with opposition, but you have to remember why you even got involved in what it is that you're pursuing. And it was to honor the legacy of T. Thomas Fortune, who lived in this house at 94 Dr. James Parker Boulevard in Red Bank. So that was my reason for getting involved in the project.
I see that Terry has their hand raised. Terry, you're welcome to unmute and ask a question.
Hi, thank you very much. This is a fascinating presentation, and I will be early to admit till I got the invite that I was unaware of T. Thomas Fortune, but I'll certainly, and ironically, I am viewing Gilded Age now, even though it came out a few years ago. So that's, I think I know where he's fitting in the story, but we'll wait to see that unfold.
Well, yeah.
So it's fascinating. I'm in Hoboken, New Jersey, and we have literally a nice, it's a plus minus situation because we have a number of historic buildings and historic homes, and two of them right now, unfortunately, are up for grabs, if you will. So the processes have begun. One incorporates a house. These are among these two houses that simultaneously are going through this kind of review are probably among the 5 oldest. They actually may be the first and second oldest. We don't have a feel for dates on either, just periods. But they're, let's say 1840 or 1850-ish, and ahead of the massive brick buildings and brownstone houses that fill much of Hoboken. So these two places in Hoboken have quite a bit of real estate value and quite a bit of inherent value, not because of the buildings. So that's the pressure on both. So I just want to learn from you or others in the audience, without a historic person having lived to my knowledge, in either of these, it has not come up, and they both did involve or are involving the our local Historic Preservation Commission. Just get into what are the other do's and don'ts to grab attention for these. So the one is moving through our planning board. because it's going to be, the proposals to incorporate it, but just the facade, the front facade, which is a limited view into it, and then but into a much bigger building. My personal opinion is it would be unrecognizable, even though they are keeping that facade and certain elements of the front during this period. And the second one is in worse shape, physically, but not unlike, at least looking at your picture of the before shot for the T. Thomas Fortune House. That's currently just in front of the HPC, but the Preservation Commission, because any demolition in Hoboken has to be approved, period. So that's a mandatory, but the owners in both cases have made deals to sell them for higher values than the innate value of these structures. And the one is going to be, if they get their way, a tear down. So I'm just interested in the broader.
Why? Let me ask you a question. Why do you want to save them?
Because they're unique older buildings. They're they predate by 15 or 20 years the other structures in town.
So have you started to put together like a PR, public relations campaign in regard to the importance of them being saved? Or maybe you need to link it to something that would enhance their value in regard to them being saved?
Well, that's a good question. There are individuals tracking this that are attending the meetings and that are asking, highlighting the importance of these versus, say, other structures that we have much more of. But it's not, I wouldn't call it a massive PR campaign. One has been mentioned on our group. We have a group called the Responsible Development Task Force. So it's been mentioned on our website. The other one, frankly, came up so recently that basically the owner died. The owner was a historian and very aware of the uniqueness. It's a frame building, which is fairly rare in Hoboken. So it's a wooden building. The other one is masonry. And his death has created the sale situation through his family. And apparently it was listed for sale, but many people were unaware of it. So I think a developer had the insight, and it's just at a valuable location.
I think, Gilda, your point about having to give people something to latch onto, to feel something about these sites other than just that they are old, and Terry, we'd love to link you with Kelly so that we can get you some of the Preservation New Jersey toolkits, if that's helpful to you.
Sure. Kelly was aware of the first case, which is ongoing, but she's not aware of this latest case with the frame building, because it's that recent. And our group has had one building that we lost that was listed in the 10 most. When I say lost, it was packaged up by NJ Transit about 5 years ago, and there's been no plan yet to reassemble it either where it was, which is very unlikely, or elsewhere in the massive rail yards development that's there in southern Hoboken. So I'm looking for some general things. I do appreciate your point about publicity. Apparently, a very well regarded, that I don't follow, column that's tips on lifestyle called Hoboken Girl covered the frame building recently and got a lot of eyeballs on it. I don't know what kind of leverage that would have, but it has something, because a lot of people that I wouldn't have known were aware of it, and therefore many people showed up virtually, just like this.
Yeah,
At
you
the
have to
HTC
continue, you have to
meeting was
continue
reviewed.
to raise the bar and just why it's so important to hold on to them.
Right, that one, again, not unlike the Fortune House, would require a great deal of investment, and it's unclear where that investment would come from. It's also, unfortunately, that house is in our extensive flood zone, and that means the FEMA gets involved if major renovation is necessary, and apparently it is, just to recreate the foundation. So that's another twist and turn. It doesn't apply to the other house, but I'm just airing these issues to hear ideas. One of our other members suggested that I attend this lecture because of the content.
Well, thank you so much, Terry, for joining us. And I think Gilda's point about the PR is a good one. Michelle is writing in the chat to fear not that these buildings are not associated with famous individuals. That's not necessary. And that, of course, the architectural significance might be, your criteria for preservation versus association with significant individuals or events in history, as Gilda's was. Speaking of, Terry noted that there would probably be a great deal of investment required to save those particular properties. We have some questions in the chat, Gilda, about your significant financial investment, which comes from Mr. Mumford, right? So can you talk a little more about how he gets involved in the project and what that relationship looks like?
Well, he actually purchased the property and went about rehabilitating the home, and then deeded the property back to our organization, which is now a 501c3, the T. Thomas Fortune Foundation, for $1. And we run the home as a cultural center to invite in all people. Our mission is to uphold the civil rights and social justice legacy of T. Thomas Fortune through education, through community outreach, through the arts, and through public programming. So we have a robust public programming, events, lecture series, our fortune tellers group. We have a number of exhibits that speak to local history, the Drs. James Parker family, which were very prominent people in Red Bank during the turn of the 20th century. It is even the history of A. Philip Randolph exists in Red Bank. Count Basie, we have an exhibit of Count Basie. Count Basie, his parents were part of the Great Migration. Count Basie is a part of the Harlem Renaissance. So our exhibit on Count Basie is called The Love Letter to Count Basie from the Great Migration to the Harlem Renaissance. So it gave me the opportunity as a curator to be able to tell the story of the Great Migration through the eyes of his parents, and then the Harlem Renaissance through his. We also have now just opened a new exhibit that opened in October called The Black Press, Stewards of Democracy. So we have a lot of interesting things for people to see when they come to the Cultural Center, from primary sources that Fortune wrote in magazines that we actually own from 1890. What else? We have a lovely gift shop where we sell a lot of books and items that are Afrocentric related to Black history and culture. And we have the Carrie Smiley Fortune Library, which is in the home, which is a space devoted to, literature autobiographies, books. We've had historians, as well as people working on their research projects and master theses, dissertations come and visit us. Actually, the actor who played Fortune in the Gilded Age has visited us at the home. The great the great saxophone player, Branford Marsalis, has come to the home. So people are finding out about us. They're finding out about Fortune. We do, school tours throughout the school year, and they have been very successful. We offer education to students that they don't often get in their classrooms, to be able to bring them together in our space to talk to them about race, culture, history, but particularly the contributions that African American people have made, like Dr. Charles Drew, who is responsible for the development of Blood Plaza. He was Dr. Parker's professor at Howard University, and the Dr. Parker family is an exhibit that we have there. So you would learn about, who is Dr. Charles Drew. When we talk about T. Thomas Fortune, during his time, Booker T. Washington, Lewis Latimer, who was the great scientist, visited Fortune at that home, which he called Maple Hall. And Lewis Latimer, most people don't know, he was responsible for making the light bulb, which we credit Thomas Edison with. Lewis Latimer actually was able to make the light bulb stay lit much longer. So that was his contribution, but most people don't know that as well. So it's a lot of African American information that is housed in that cultural center that is a benefit and a resource to, Monmouth County, Red Bank, state of New Jersey. So yeah, we're very proud of the work that we do out of the T. Thomas Fortune Cultural Center.
I do find that so fascinating, Gilda. The work you do there is so expansive. You use this platform of T. Thomas Fortune to then springboard and look at so many more people's stories and themes. I think that's really, really admirable. I've got a question in the chat about your professional advisors. So, for example, a theme tonight has been you need to make people care. You need to make some noise. You need to have grassroots support, right? Just one or two preservationists saying that site's important, unfortunately, often doesn't create enough of an impact to save a site. You need to get the community involved, and you certainly did that. But talk to us a little bit about those professional advisors you pulled in, whether it's historians, preservationists. I think you've had Rich Veit involved, Dr. Walter Grayson.
Dr. Walter Grayson.
Yeah,
Dr.
tell
Walter
us about
Grayson is on our board. Dr. Veit was involved with us. He did what was called a tree ring study at the home, just to give us some sense of, dates and times of different parts of the house when they were constructed. Myself, I'm a historian. And we've had Mark, one of our board members. He's a known architect in the state and in Red Bank. He has his own architectural firm. And so we've had people that are, been advisors to us to guide us along the way and making this, come to fruition.
Now, there have been some who have voiced concerns, and you've certainly touched upon these concerns already, Gilda, about the preservation of the site perhaps not being textbook enough, and suggesting that the site has become kind of a facsimile of what it would have been. What is your take on that?
I think it's it's unproductive because it's trying to negate what it is that is really happening at the cultural center, you know, and like I said, it's always going to be opposition to what it is that maybe someone didn't particularly care for how something was done. All right. However, the content of the work that we do at the cultural center speaks loud and clear for itself. And I'm not, you know, I'm woman enough to be able to accept what someone else may feel as though it should have been done another way. That's fine. We're all entitled to our own opinion. Nevertheless, the home is there and we're doing good work. And that's the bottom line.
Okay, anyone else want to unmute and ask a question? Terry, is your hand up again, or is that from before?
It is.
Please, go ahead.
And this, you know, although it applies obviously to the two cases in Hoboken that I just mentioned, I'm sure it applied to you, and it applies to many others that are involved with preservation. What was the financial push? In other words, what did the owners, either in dollar and cents terms or in general terms, was this a inherently a valuable property as land based on its location? And did that become an element of all these discussions?
It was shy of an acre of land. And originally the Green Acres program from New Jersey had gotten involved, and they were going to purchase the property. And then the organization, the T. Thomas Fortune Committee, which it still was at that time, would have been responsible to, you know, restore the home, rehabilitate, preserve the home. But as it turned out, they rejected the state's offer. So that is when, you know, after that is when Roger Mumford got involved. And the property was sold for close to $1 million, which involved the land and, you know, the structure that was there.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot of pressure. $1 million, there's always pressure. Thank you.
Okay, we are almost at the hour. Are there any more questions from the audience? All right, well, thank you so much, Gilda. We know that there's no one size fits all solution to preservation, but seeing those before and after photos of the T. Thomas Fortune House are really powerful, and the work you are doing there to tell such diverse, dynamic, and, you know, far-reaching stories and incorporating youth, no less, I think are really, really inspirational. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, teaching and writing and running the cultural center, to talk to us.
I would just invite people to come and see for yourself what is there and how we're making a difference in the community with the work that we do. We get excellent surveys back from students who come through for school tours. And to me, that is what's important, because we're touching those young lives and, you know, making them take a look at what was in the past, how it relates to the future, how it relates to today, and how they can move it forward for tomorrow. And that is what we do. And so I'm grateful and thankful for the opportunity to do that and to pass that information on to young people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gilda. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and get out there and visit the T. Thomas Fortune Cultural Center. Have a great day.
You too.